Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today I wanted to compare two cards that are selling at close to the same price. AMD's RX 6800 XT and Nvidia's RTX 3070. At this time of recording, the 6800 XT can be found for as cheap as $540 when it is in stock. And right now I do see it is out, but I've seen pretty frequent restocks as well. Looking at the 3070, it's $530, so almost the same price as the 6800 XT, where the 6800 XT has twice the amount of memory at 16 gigabytes to the 3070's 8 gigabytes. So I'm kind of curious, how much of a difference is there between the two cards realistically if they're selling at the same price? Does, Nvidia's improved ray tracing performance make up the difference? Well, let's jump into the benchmarks and find out. Starting out with Spiderman Remastered, I've been playing this game a lot lately actually, so let's see if upgrading from the 3070 to a 6800 XT was worth it in the end. At 4K with the very high preset, the 6800 XT is blowing the 3070 out of the water. Never dipping below 60 FPS and frequently sticking around the high 70s, even shooting into the 90 FPS average once in a while, although it isn't consistent. Looking over at the 3070, it struggles to deliver anything playable, sometimes averaging 60 FPS, but very frequently dipping into the low 40s and 50s. A pretty huge loss for the 3070 here. Now at 4K, with very high ray tracing enabled, neither card delivers a playable experience. The 6800 XT sticks around the 40s, which isn't terrible, but really not ideal. Looking at the 3070, the ray tracing performance is actually even worse, struggling to even crest past the 30 FPS mark and looking extremely choppy. Bumping down to 1440p resolution with the very high preset and keeping the ray tracing on, the 3070 gives a pretty playable experience, sticking really close to the 60 FPS mark with infrequent dips into the 40s, which honestly, these dips don't feel too uncommon for this game to have. Looking at the 6800 XT, it actually seems quite similar in performance, sticking around the 60s as well, but when swinging around the city, I personally didn't experience the same dips into the 40s like what was happening on the 3070. At 1440p, very high preset, with the ray tracing now turned off, the 3070 really starts to flex its muscles as it easily averages at least 80 FPS, even going into the 100s on occasion. The 6800 XT likewise has an extremely easy time, but averaging past 100 FPS almost the entire time, once again beating the 3070 in both tests. Lastly, we take a look at the 1080p performance. With ray tracing off, we are having a pretty similar experience to what we had at 1440p, so either we're reaching a CPU bottleneck or we're pushing the engine to its limit. The 3070 was about the same, averaging well over 100 FPS, and same goes for the 6800 XT. Turning ray tracing on at 1080p though lowered our average quite a bit, bringing us down to averaging in the 70s for the 6800 XT. And it finally seems the 3070 kind of gets a win here, averaging 1080p ray trace performance, arguably a little bit better, but we are talking maybe a few percentage here. They both stick around 70 FPS mostly. I think you could probably overall call the 1080p performance a tie. Switching over to a non-ray trace game with Red Dead Redemption 2, we started at 4K with the graphics settings at the lowest part of the favor quality preset. The 6800 XT does extremely well here, averaging 65 FPS, and from what I saw in the benchmark, only dipped below that mark into the high 50s one time. The 3070 does quite a bit worse, sticking under the 60 FPS mark almost the entire benchmark. We average 57 FPS, which doesn't seem far off the 6800 XT, but in practice you can definitely see more dips. At 1440p with the preset at max quality, the 6800 XT once again does extremely well, averaging 100 FPS. The 3070 is no slouch here either, averaging 80 FPS, although it once again loses by quite a bit. Ending our Red Dead Redemption 2 benchmark at 1080p, the performance didn't change a whole lot for the 6800 XT. Once again, seemingly maybe we've hit like a CPU bottleneck or the engine's limit. The 3070 averaged 100 FPS, so it was still doing worse than the 6800 XT, which averaged 120 FPS. Changing gears, let's take a look at some Doom Eternal benchmarks. Starting at 1080p this time, with ray tracing enabled, the 6800 XT was very easily and nicely keeping over 144 FPS. In crowded areas, it seems to average the high 100s in FPS, and when it's less busy, we go well into the high 200s. The 3070 also is doing pretty well, but is struggling to keep around the 144 FPS, averaging just above 100, so surprisingly doing quite a bit worse. At 1080p, with the ray tracing off, the 6800 XT is averaging almost 300 FPS, which is really insane. The 3070 gets absolutely slaughtered here. It does good, averaging a little over 144 FPS, but the 6800 XT is effectively getting double the performance here. Going up to 1440p with ray tracing, the 6800 XT is having a harder time keeping around the 144 FPS mark, dipping pretty frequently into the 120 or 130s in terms of FPS. The 3070 actually loses in ray trace performance here once again, averaging a little over 60 FPS, where the 6800 XT is once again getting almost double the FPS. Moving on to 4K with ray tracing off, the 6800 XT does a pretty good job here, keeping above 100 FPS, averaging around 120. In less busy areas, we can average 144 FPS even. The 3070 does pretty well here too, averaging around 80 FPS, so it isn't quite the landslide victory for the 6800 XT. Lastly, we have the 6800 XT on its own, because the 3070 doesn't even have enough VRAM to run the game at 4K with ray tracing enabled. So, let's see if the 6800 XT can actually pull off something playable with these settings. And, in my opinion, it actually does. So my metric for 4K gameplay is usually 60 FPS, even though I know some 4K 144Hz monitors are out there, but I think a lot of 4K gamers are like me, and they use a living room 4K television, which usually only goes up to 60 Hz. So the 6800 XT easily averages above that, so this is a pretty great showing. The final game we're going to be looking at today is Cyberpunk 2077. Starting out with 1080p once again, we are at ultra ray tracing, and the 3070 really struggles here, only averaging 39 FPS, and the 6800 XT doesn't do any better and actually looks slightly worse, only averaging 37 FPS. Bumping down to medium ray tracing at 1080p, the 3070 starts to do a little better, but still can't seem to get to the 60 FPS average, only getting 53 FPS. It is once again a similar story for the 6800 XT, really doing no better, averaging 51 FPS. When we get to 1080p low ray tracing, the 3070 finally gives a playable experience, averaging a pretty nice 82 FPS. I have a feeling you probably could tweak some settings a bit higher here too, so that you could maybe get it down to 60 FPS and have a nicer looking experience. The 6800 XT similarly finally gives a playable experience, but this time it actually earns a win over the 3070, averaging 94 FPS. Pretty surprising to see the two cards neck and neck until the very end here. Turning off ray tracing and just running 1080p Ultra, the 3070 easily averages 94 FPS, putting up a great performance, and the 6800 XT likewise looks very good here, once again beating out the 3070 though in raw performance by averaging 132 FPS. Increasing to 1440p at the Ultra preset settings, the 3070 does pretty decent here, getting a 60 FPS average on the dot, but we do see some small dips in gameplay. The 6800 XT on the other hand does extremely well here, averaging 82 FPS, showing it's a 1440p powerhouse in rasterized performance. Decreasing the settings a bit to 1440p high, the 3070 averages an increased 65 FPS and is no longer experiencing the frequent dips below 60, where the 6800 XT kind of slaughters the 3070 once again here, averaging 90 FPS. Adding on some ray tracing, we decided to start with 1440p ultra ray tracing, and the 3070 really struggles here, averaging 24 FPS and looking unbelievably choppy. The 6800 XT is no better, averaging a slightly worse 22 FPS, but neither one is even remotely playable. In an attempt to get a playable 1440p ray trace experience, we bumped it down to the low ray tracing setting, and here the 3070 still doesn't deliver anything great, honestly, averaging 54 FPS. Getting close to that 60 FPS mark, but it just isn't quite there. The 6800 XT once again looks pretty similar, but actually slightly wins out, averaging 62 FPS. Inside the bar, it really didn't look great, but the second we go outside, the FPS really took a big jump up. Moving up to 4K, we started with the medium preset, and the 3070 only averages a measly 40 FPS. While when we look over at the 6800 XT, it gets really close to averaging 60 FPS, but it sits right below it, averaging 54. We tried bumping down to 4K low, and the 3070 still couldn't average a 60 FPS experience, getting a 56 FPS average. Once again, coming really close, but honestly, you would be better off using 1440p resolution with higher settings on a 4K TV in my opinion. Even though it wouldn't be as crisp, the game overall would probably look better. Looking over the 6800 XT, it averaged 76 FPS. So it has some headroom to tweak a few settings and bump them up maybe, and I think you maybe could actually give a pretty good 4K experience here, but it's not going to be excellent. Well, that's going to do it for the benchmark suite, guys. I mean, obviously there's a lot of other games we could have tried out. I've been thinking of getting Modern Warfare 2 to run some benchmarks. There's a couple other new games coming out like Plague, Tales of Requiem and stuff like that, but honestly, across the board, the 6800 XT, even when it came to ray tracing, was still beating the 3070, and honestly, the 3070 in terms of its ray tracing performance isn't actually that good anyways. So overall, for the cost, I mean, it's an easy $10 more for a 6800 XT when you look at, you know, how much better it is overall. Obviously, in just straight rasterized performance, the 6800 XT slaughters the 3070 in almost every metric. I mean, there's games like Doom Eternal where it was doubling the 3070's FPS, and there's a lot of other games where it was beating it by 20, 30 FPS on average, which is, you know, just insane. And then even with the ray tracing on, it frequently was beating it by like 10 FPS here or there, you know, and the times that it wasn't beating it, they were tying, but honestly, neither one of them were giving, to me, acceptable ray tracing performance, because I at least like to get 60 FPS, and if you're not even reaching that metric, then I just find it to be not acceptable. You might as well just turn the ray tracing off. I don't know if there's much more that needs to be said here, guys. The 6800 XT is a no-brainer. I'm pretty happy with my upgrade. I have been using it for the past, well, since Black Friday, so the past couple weeks of when I'm going to be uploading this video. And like I said, I've been playing a lot of Spider-Man Remastered, and it's been doing fantastic. I mean, the other benefit that you maybe could have pointed out was DLSS versus FSR. If I'm going to be honest, I was using DLSS when using the 3070, and now I'm using FSR 2.1. And I haven't seen a very big difference at all. I don't even actually think I've been seeing any difference. The biggest difference I've noticed is I'm actually able to play at 4K resolution on my 4K television. I wasn't doing that before because even with DLSS on the 3070, I had to bump the settings down so low to even get it to work, or I had to have the DLSS upscale up so high that it was starting to look kind of fuzzy and just a lot of ghosting and really crappy. I mean, if you've played Spider-Man before, you know how quickly you can swing around the city, and just seeing like the buildings ghost a lot and stuff like that was just not great. So, I mean, that is already a huge performance upgrade for me, being able to actually play at 4K in this game. And I still do get some dips, but that's besides the point. I'm rambling a bit. Basically what I'm getting at is, do not pay the NVIDIA tax, especially on these mid to lower end NVIDIA cards. The AMD options are much better right now, especially at their cost. I mean, you're getting same price for like just like 20-30% more performance. I mean, it's just crazy. I don't know how they have sold out of 3070s. When I looked at Newegg, you can barely even pick one up right now. It's insane. And you know, with the 1600 XT, I still see them restocking, and they are selling out, but I see them restocking really frequently. So next restock, keep your eyes out, try to pick one up. That's my recommendation for right now. And hold on to that good deal until maybe you can get a good deal on like the 7900 XT, or hopefully they do some price cuts on the 4080 or something like that. I mean, right now I was really excited for the 7900 XTX, but the benchmarks came out and I wasn't super impressed. I will have some coming in pretty soon just to give you guys a little update on that. So we're going to be doing some benchmarks with it together. Should still be an awesome card. I think the performance is great. It's just the cost is kind of insane. So that's going to do it for today's video, guys. Leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video today. Really helps out. If you have any questions about, any of the benchmarks I was running, or, just anything in general, how I've been feeling about the 6800 XT in my current rig, feel free to leave a comment. I try to reply to them as much as possible, and you could possibly get into the next Q&A video I do as well. And then lastly, if you've been watching quite a bit of my content and you enjoy it, consider subscribing. We're really close to 100. As I'm recording this, I'm at 97. I need 3 more subscribers to hit 100. Who knows? Maybe by the time I upload it, I'll be hitting my 100 mark. I mean, you know how big that is for many YouTubers here. The first 100 is really exciting, so I'm kind of pumped about that. Should be happening any day now. So thank you guys all for watching today, and I hope to see you all in another video.